Chapter 467. Selena stepped onto the high platform and quietly let out a breath she did not realize she had been holding. Her hands remained folded before her, calm on the outside, but her mind was somewhere far away. She lifted her eyes and looked across the grand plaza below. Thousands upon thousands of people stared back at her. The moment she appeared properly on the platform, the crowd that had remained restrained suddenly began stirring again. Whispers spread through the plaza like waves moving across water. Voices rose one after another as people leaned toward each other, exchanging hurried words and guesses. Nobles quietly discussed among themselves, while commoners stretched their necks trying to get a better view. Silence. A platinum holy knight struck the end of his spear heavily against the platform floor. Bang! The sound echoed through the entire grand plaza. His powerful voice followed immediately after, carrying far beyond what seemed possible. Behave yourselves, you stand in the presence of her holiness. The effect was immediate. The crowd instantly fell silent. No hesitation, no complaints, no resistance. Nobles, merchants, church believers, and commoners all lowered their voices at once. It became so quiet that the earlier noise almost felt like an illusion. No one dared to step beyond the command of a platinum holy knight. Some even unconsciously straightened their backs. Others lowered their heads slightly. A few people looked tense enough that they did not even dare breathe too loudly, afraid of drawing attention to themselves. The platinum knight did not react further, as his duty had already been fulfilled. He simply turned back toward Selena, placed a fist respectfully over his chest, and bowed slightly before moving toward the far side of the platform. He stood silently at guard once more. Silence returned completely, but Selena barely noticed any of it. Her thoughts were still elsewhere. Your Grace. A soft voice reached her ears. Selena slowly turned her head. Beside her stood Nilla. The young woman wore pristine white cleric robes, untouched and neat despite the crowd and commotion. Her pink-framed glasses reflected faint light as she nervously adjusted them with one hand. Worry was clear on her face. Real worry. Your Grace, please tell me if something happened. Nilla lowered her voice so only Selena could hear. I am your personal holy attendant, so if there is anything troubling you, you can speak to me. She hesitated briefly before continuing. Forgive me for stepping out of my place, but I am worried about you. Nilla looked at Selena carefully. For the last few weeks you have barely spoken to anyone. You have not allowed people to attend you properly, and you refuse to meet almost everyone. Her brows knitted together. And now suddenly, this gathering? She looked toward the endless crowd below before looking back at Selena. Please tell me what this is about, Your Grace. She was trying very hard not to sound as though she were questioning Selena, but she could not help it. She had gone beyond worry already. Stress, confusion, and fear had all piled up together. Selena quietly looked back at her. Those beautiful eyes held something complicated inside them. Sadness, guilt, hesitation, and maybe regret. Because Selena knew something Nilla did not. After today, things would change. People would begin seeing her differently. No, not differently. For the first time, they would see the real her. The image they held of the Saintess, the perfect person everyone admired and worshipped, that image would crack. And maybe after that, people would hate her. Selena lowered her eyes slightly. She had not told Nilla because she already knew exactly what would happen if she did. Nilla was Nilla, kind, loyal, and stubborn. She would never allow it. She would immediately inform the Platinum Knights and the church. And the church itself would never allow such a thing to happen. Never. The Saintess was not just a person. She was the face of the church, a symbol of faith itself. They would never allow dirt to stain that image before the masses. Selena looked at Nilla quietly before speaking softly. Sorry, Nilla, but I have to do this. Nilla blinked. What? She asked, becoming even more confused. Do what, Your Grace? She looked at Selena, trying to understand what those words meant. But before she could ask further, a figure suddenly descended gently from the sky behind her. Her long platinum hair moved gently beneath the wind. So let us do this, Celestia murmured softly, as she descended from the air and landed upon the platform. The moment her feet touched the marble floor, a faint wave of air spread outward and her long platinum hair settled behind her shoulders. Her eyes immediately moved toward Selena. She looked different today, very different. The coldness that usually sat within her gaze was gone. That distant, prideful expression she always carried had disappeared somewhere along the way. Even the confusion and conflict that had followed her these last days seemed absent now. There was only clarity left. And sadness. A quiet sadness. Selena looked at her for several seconds before slowly nodding. Her lips pressed together tightly. A small smile appeared on her face. A difficult smile, one that looked more painful than happy. I thought you would not come, Selena said after several moments, her voice soft. Celestia heard her words and remained silent. For a few seconds, she simply looked back at Selena, saying nothing. Then finally, she started softly. It took a slap to my face to wake me up. She spoke quietly, enough that only the few standing around them could hear. Her eyes slowly lifted again, to understand what things really matter. The wind moved gently through her hair. I am awake now. Her voice sounded calm, but the sadness beneath it remained there clear. Selena stared at her. For a few moments, she said nothing. Her golden eyes reflected Celestia's face quietly. The Celestia she had always known looked cold, prideful, and distant. She was a woman who always looked as if she cared only for herself, and no one else. It was as if emotions and attachments were unnecessary burdens. But today, that face looked different. There was heaviness there, pain, regret, and something softer hidden beneath all of it. Slowly, Selena began walking toward her. One step, then another, until she stood directly before her. She gently reached out and held Celestia's hand. Her fingers slowly tightened around it. Let us do this. Her voice softened. Together. Her eyes carried sadness. And something else, regret. It was as if she were wishing they had reached this point much sooner. As if wishing none of this had taken so long. Celestia looked down at their joined hands. Her eyes trembled slightly, but she did not pull away. Meanwhile, a few steps away, Nilla muttered under her breath, a slap. Her eyes widened behind her pink-framed glasses. Did she hear that correctly? The Imperial Princess said she got slapped. Nilla slowly turned her head toward Celestia, very slowly. Like some old machine forcing itself to move, her mind had already become a complete mess. But just as she turned, Celestia, who had still been looking at Selena, with a small sad smile, moved only her eyes toward Nilla without even turning her face. Their eyes met. Nilla instantly froze. Her entire body stiffened. Cold sweat almost immediately formed on her back. Apologies. She bowed so quickly it almost looked painful, her body trembling slightly as she lowered her head. She immediately stepped backward after speaking, swallowing every bit of curiosity and shock back into her throat. No, absolutely not. She wanted no involvement with whatever she had just heard. None at all. Definitely not with this woman. Meanwhile, Selena and Celestia simply walked toward the front edge of the platform together. Below them stretched an endless sea of people. Thousands of eyes stared back at them. The entire Grand Plaza remained silent. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Everyone was waiting. They were waiting for them to finally explain why they had gathered the entire empire here. Selena and Celestia stood side by side at the edge of the platform, looking over the crowd as people held their breaths in anticipation. Then, Selena slowly opened her mouth. Today, her soft voice spread across the Grand Plaza, carried by magic to every corner of the enormous gathering. Beneath the long sleeves of her robes, her hands had unknowingly tightened into fists. Both of us called everyone here, because there is something that should have been said a long time ago. Her voice remained gentle, as it always was, but there was something beneath it now. A slight tremble, a hesitation. It was something many people had never heard from the Saintess before. Beside her, Celestia slowly stepped forward. The movement itself immediately drew attention. The Imperial Princess stood beside the Saintess and looked over the endless crowd below. Thousands upon thousands of eyes stared back at her. Normally she would not care. Normally she would not even bother looking twice. People looking at her, praising her, and fearing her had never mattered. But today felt strange. Today those eyes felt heavier than they ever had before. Her expression remained calm, though the usual coldness within her eyes was gone. First, she said quietly, "Thank you for coming." No one spoke. No one dared interrupt. Even the restless children who had been whispering earlier had gone silent. "We know many of you are confused. We know many of you are wondering why such a gathering was suddenly called." Her eyes slowly moved across the crowd. Nobles, church believers, commoners, knights, and families. People from every part of the empire. And the answer is simple. She paused. For a brief moment, her lips pressed together. "We are here because we lied." Silence. Complete silence. The words seemed to settle over the plaza without anyone understanding them immediately. Many people simply stared. Some blinked. Some thought they had heard incorrectly. Even Nilla froze behind them. Her eyes widened behind her glasses as she stared at Selena and Celestia's backs. Lied. Several platinum holy knights standing guard frowned slightly beneath their helmets. Their grips unconsciously tightened around their weapons. Some nobles exchanged confused glances. A few church elders frowned deeply. Nobody understood, not yet. Celestia lowered her eyes slightly. "The truth we are about to speak," she continued quietly, "is regarding someone all of you know." At those words, the attention of the crowd sharpened instantly. Someone everyone knew? People slowly began looking toward one another. Small whispers almost threatened to start before dying immediately under the pressure of the atmosphere. Some people looked confused. Some began guessing silently. Some had already started feeling uneasy without knowing why. Then Celestia spoke again. "Someone all of you hate dearly." Her voice remained calm. "Someone all of you look at with disgust. Someone hated and loathed throughout the entire empire because of us. Someone who was looked at with disgust even by his own family because of us. Kicked out of his own family because of us." This time, visible reactions finally appeared. Brows furrowed. Eyes widened. Even some nobles looked at one another with uncertainty. Because suddenly, there were not many people who fit that description. Several names briefly passed through people's minds. Then they slowly disappeared. Only one remained. No, people immediately rejected the thought. It could not be him. Lied about him. No way. No one said it aloud. No one wanted to be the first. Then, the person called Razeal. Instantly, expressions changed. Some frowned deeply. Some narrowed their eyes. Some looked genuinely confused. Others simply stared at the platform. Shock slowly spread through the crowd. Because nobody had expected that name. People stared in silence. Not to say what lie about him. Many had already formed guesses the moment Razeal's name was spoken, but almost immediately they shook their heads. No way, that could not be what they were thinking. Some looked toward one another with uncertainty. Others frowned deeply, trying to understand where all of this was leading. The nobles standing near the front had already begun exchanging quiet glances, while many church believers simply stood there with stiff expressions. Celestia quietly lowered her gaze toward her own hands. For the first time in a very long time, she felt uncomfortable standing before so many people. It was not because of fear, not because she cared about their opinions, but today she stood before them without titles, without status, without the pride she had always hidden behind. Just herself. Years ago, she continued, her voice carrying across the Grand Plaza, during the hearing in the Imperial Court. Several people straightened slightly. The Imperial Court, everyone knew what hearing she was referring to. I declared him guilty. Her expression did not change, and everyone trusted my judgment and believed it. Her voice remained steady, because they had. No one had questioned her. No one had doubted her. She had been the Imperial Princess, the Empire's pride, a genius blessed by fate itself. Who would dare question her words? But today she would reveal it. Celestia slowly raised her eyes, and looked across the countless faces below her. She could already see the changes happening. Confusion, disbelief, and uneasiness. People were beginning to think of something they desperately did not want to believe. But today, she said quietly, I will tell the truth. Silence fell even deeper. Then I lied. Nothing happened, not immediately. No gasps, no shouting, no movement. Because people had stopped understanding what they were hearing. The words entered their ears, but their minds refused to accept them. Even the crowd itself looked frozen. Celestia slowly raised her eyes. The truth is, she said quietly, I wanted to break my engagement with him. Her voice had grown softer now. I liked him, she admitted after a pause. I think, maybe I even loved him, I do not know. Her eyes lowered slightly. But the truth is he was weak, and that was a fact. The words felt heavier this time. And back then, I did not like that fact. I deemed him unworthy of standing beside someone like me. She gave a faint breath. I thought the decision I made in childhood to marry him was wrong. I was confused. Her fingers slowly moved against each other. I avoided him because I wanted distance. I found him annoying. Then a small bitter smile appeared on her face, a smile directed toward herself. No, maybe that is not true. She shook her head slightly. Maybe I simply never bothered trying to understand him. Her eyes reflected a quiet sadness now. I loathed him because of his weakness. Because he had no talent. Because he was not standing at the same height as me. Because he was not worthy of me. Below the platform, several people unconsciously lowered their eyes. Because those thoughts, those ugly thoughts, many of them had shared them too. Celestia slowly looked ahead again. And I wanted freedom. But our marriage had been arranged by my mother, Her Imperial Majesty, the Empress. I did not want to go against her. So I chose another path. Her voice remained calm, but her fingers had slowly curled into her palms. I was selfish. And for that, I did not even give him the smallest amount of respect anyone should deserve at the very least. Not even that. Silence covered the Grand Plaza. Then after a few seconds, I chose the easiest path. And finally she said it, I used him. Chapter 468. I chose the easiest path. Celestia's fingers slowly tightened. I used him. Silence followed. It was not ordinary silence. It was not the kind that came when people simply had nothing to say. This was the kind of silence that came when words themselves stopped making sense. A child somewhere in the crowd blinked and looked up at his father with confusion. Several nobles stared blankly toward the platform, as though they had misheard something. A church believer frowned deeply, his lips parting slightly before closing again. No one spoke. No one knew how to. Because the Imperial Princess had just admitted to using someone. Using Razeal. For years, people had known him only as a disgrace, a shameful stain upon the Empire, a weak man whose name brought disgust and ridicule wherever it was spoken. Yet now, the very people who had stood against him were standing before the entire Empire, and saying something completely different. The minds of the people below seemed to stop. They simply stared. Then Selena slowly stepped forward. Immediately, every eye shifted toward her. The movement happened almost naturally, instinctively. Even people still struggling to understand Celestia's words found themselves looking at Selena. Because no matter what happened, no matter what confusion existed within their minds, there was still one thing that remained unchanged in their hearts. Their Saintess. Selena remained quiet for several seconds. It was very quiet. The wind lightly brushed through strands of her golden hair as she stood there at the edge of the platform. Her eyes slowly moved across the sea of faces below her. Thousands of people, thousands of expressions. People who loved her, people who admired her, people who had traveled great distances just to catch a single glimpse of her. Then her eyes slowly lowered. I had lied too. Her voice was soft, very soft. Yet somehow every person heard it clearly. No magic amplification was needed. No one missed those words. Not when the entire Grand Plaza had become so silent. Tears had already begun gathering in her eyes, small droplets forming slowly at the corners. He never touched me. Her lips trembled slightly. He never forced himself on me. He never harmed me. The tears finally escaped. One small drop slowly rolled down her cheek, then another. That was a lie. Her voice had become heavy, painfully heavy. Suddenly at those words, the atmosphere changed. It was not through noise or movement, but through feeling. A strange heaviness spread across the Grand Plaza, because this time people understood exactly what she meant, and they did not want to. Far below the platform, someone unconsciously took a step backward. A woman covered her mouth, and an old man simply stared with widened eyes. Saintess. The whisper came from somewhere in the crowd, confused, shaken, and almost frightened. Then another voice spoke. Saintess, no, that cannot be. The whispers began spreading, not loudly. Nobody dared raise their voice. Only broken sounds escaped from people who looked as though the ground beneath their feet had suddenly disappeared. Because they could not understand. Their Saintess lied. It was impossible, absolutely impossible. Their minds rejected it immediately, but their eyes betrayed them. Because they were looking directly at her, looking at her trembling lips, looking at the tears falling from her face, looking at the pain within her eyes. Something inside their hearts tightened painfully because Selena looked hurt, actually hurt. A middle-aged church believer stood among the crowd staring blankly. Years ago, Selena herself had once healed his son from a deadly illness. He still remembered kneeling before her and crying while thanking her over and over. He remembered her smile, remembered her telling him softly not to worry. He remembered feeling as if a miracle had appeared before him. Now, seeing tears falling from her eyes, his own eyes slowly reddened. "No," he whispered weakly. Nearby, an elderly woman covered her mouth with trembling hands. Further away, several young girls who had grown up idolizing Selena stared with wet eyes. One had already begun quietly crying, not because of the confession or the lie. She simply could not bear seeing Selena cry. People had built Selena into something larger than a person long ago. A symbol of purity, a symbol of kindness, a symbol of light. Symbols were not supposed to shake, and symbols were not supposed to cry. Symbols were not supposed to stand before everyone and confess their sins. For a moment reality itself felt wrong. Several people honestly thought they were dreaming. A strange dream, a terrible dream. Because seeing the Saintess standing there with tears running down her face felt almost horrifying. Even some platinum holy knights standing nearby had lowered their eyes beneath their helmets. Nilla stood behind Selena completely frozen. Her pink-framed glasses reflected the light as her widened eyes stared toward Selena's back. She had seen Selena happy, seen her tired, seen her silent, seen her working endlessly until late nights. But she had never seen her like this. "Your Grace," she whispered without realizing. Below the platform, more people slowly shook their heads. No, she must be blaming herself for nothing. There has to be some misunderstanding. Saintess would never. They wanted to reject it desperately, because accepting this meant accepting something else too. If Selena was speaking the truth, then what about Razeal? That thought entered people's minds, and many immediately pushed it away. No way, anything but that. Because if this was true, then for years they had all hated someone innocent. Selena slowly looked over the crowd again. She saw confusion, saw pain, saw disbelief. She saw people trying desperately to reject reality. Strangely, that hurt more, much more, because nobody looked at her with hatred, not yet. Those who loved her deeply felt pain not because of the crime itself, but because she was hurting. Their first instinct was not judgment, it was to reach toward her, to tell her to stop, to tell her she did not need to cry, to tell her everything would somehow become all right. But no one moved, no one could. They simply stood there beneath the platform, and watched silently as tears slowly fell from the eyes of the woman they had always believed stood above pain itself. "Stop crying, Your Grace. Whatever happened, it is fine." The voice suddenly rose from somewhere within the crowd. For a moment, it startled everyone. Heads instinctively turned. A young church believer stood there among the masses, tears gathered in her own eyes as she looked toward Selena on the platform. Her face had reddened, and she was wiping her cheeks clumsily with her sleeves, but more tears continued escaping anyway. She was crying too, not because of the confession or the lie. She simply could not bear seeing Selena cry. Around her, many people looked toward the girl, before slowly lowering their eyes. Strangely, no one thought she was wrong. No one scolded her for speaking out because many of them had been thinking the same thing. "Stop crying, please stop crying." Some church believers had already lowered their heads, and some women were quietly wiping tears from their eyes. Even several men stood there with reddened eyes and tight expressions, avoiding looking directly at the platform. The pain they felt was strange, confusing, because what Selena was confessing should have made them angry, should have made them feel betrayed. Yet looking at her standing there with trembling shoulders, and tears quietly falling down her face, they could not right now. Selena heard the voice, and her eyelashes trembled slightly, but she did not look toward the crowd. She did not look at the people calling out to her. Slowly, she lowered her gaze and looked at her own hands instead. Those same hands had healed people, saved people, blessed people. Hands people called holy, yet today she looked at them differently, as if finally seeing them properly, as if finally allowing herself to stop carrying everything inside. Today she was letting it all out, in front of everyone, without hiding, without protecting herself, without worrying about consequences for him. "I was selfish." Her shoulders trembled slightly, and the words came quietly, almost weakly. "I thought," her lips shook faintly, "I don't know." A bitter smile briefly appeared before disappearing just as quickly. "At that time, maybe I was simply a foolish person." Her voice grew softer. "I just thought if I didn't do it." She suddenly stopped, her breathing paused. The next words seemed difficult to force out. "Then maybe he would never stay beside me." Silence, absolute silence. Tears rolled down her cheeks, not heavily, not dramatically, but quietly. Small tears falling one after another without her even trying to stop them. Then she spoke again. "I loved him." Those words left her mouth softly, so softly that many people thought they had heard wrong. "I loved him then." Her eyes slowly closed. "I still do." The moment those words fell, Nilla's eyes widened completely behind her glasses. Her lips slowly parted. Her mind had already stopped working long ago, but now it felt as though someone had struck her head directly. "Loved, still do?" She stared at Selena blankly, because suddenly, many things she never understood before started appearing in her mind. The long periods of silence, the lonely expressions. The nights Selena remained awake staring outside windows. The way she avoided speaking about certain things. Nilla slowly covered her mouth. Your Grace, she whispered weakly. Beside Selena, even Celestia became still. Her eyes slowly shifted toward Selena. She looked at her crying face, at the tears running quietly down her cheeks, at the pain she had hidden for years. Then Selena spoke again. Her voice spread across the grand plaza, heavy, shaking, filled with regret. I accused him of trying to force himself on me. The crowd froze further. Because I thought, Selena continued with difficulty, if I did that, our parents, his family, and my family, would try to hide such an incident. Her breathing had become uneven now, because it would bring shame to both families. She lowered her head slightly. And then, they would be forced to break his engagement with Celestia. Her fingers tightened together, because breaking it normally was almost impossible. Tears slowly fell from her chin. And after that, he would be forced to marry me instead. The words struck the crowd like stones thrown into still water. Shock slowly spread through faces. Many simply stared, unable to react. Selena continued speaking. I thought after the marriage was complete, I would explain everything. I would tell him, tell both families, tell them why I did it. Her voice slowly weakened, as if even she herself could now hear how selfish and foolish those thoughts had sounded, as if hearing them spoken aloud made them uglier, made them real. I thought everything would somehow become all right. Silence, nothing followed. No one spoke, no one even moved. Because now they understood, truly understood, not just what happened, but why. And somehow, that hurt more. Beside her, Celestia quietly stared at Selena. Her eyes softened. Looking at Selena's crying face, she could finally understand something she had missed all those years ago. She really loved him. She loved him so much that she became desperate. Desperate enough to become selfish. Desperate enough to hurt him. Desperate enough to destroy everything. A sad smile slowly appeared on Celestia's face before disappearing. How had she not seen it before? How? Maybe if she had seen it, things would have been different. Maybe not completely. Maybe they still would have suffered. But perhaps she could have stopped things from reaching this point. Perhaps she could have stopped everyone from being destroyed by that incident. Her eyes slowly lowered. But regrets were useless now. Far below them, the crowd stared in complete silence. Even the whispers had disappeared. People slowly looked at Selena with changing expressions. Not anger, not hatred, just disbelief, pain, confusion. But rather, understanding. Her Saintess loved him? The thought spread silently through the crowd. People looked at one another, then back toward the platform, then toward each other again. Disbelief remained on many faces, but something else had begun appearing now too. Understanding. Not complete understanding, not acceptance, just enough to make things complicated. Because before this, many of them simply could not understand why the Saintess would lie at all. That part had felt impossible. Saintess, wanting to harm someone. Saintess, intentionally destroying someone's life. No, they could never picture that. The woman they knew spent her days healing strangers and helping people she had never met. She smiled gently at children, comforted grieving families, and treated nobles and commoners no differently. That image and today's confession refused to fit together. But now, they had heard the reason. Love, a foolish love, a desperate love. People lowered their eyes quietly, because suddenly the situation no longer looked simple. Many of them remembered their own younger days, their own mistakes, the foolish things they had once done because of jealousy, fear, desperation, or love. People make mistakes. People become selfish. People did foolish things when emotions clouded their minds. Even if it was hard to believe the Saintess could love someone to that extent. Even if that person happened to be Razeal, she was still human. She had been young too. And young people often made stupid decisions. A few people quietly sighed. Such a sad mistake. Such a terribly large mistake. No one moved. No one whispered anymore. Because they had suddenly understood something. This was not some political gathering. Not an execution. Not punishment. Not power. Not status. This was simply two people standing before the entire empire and tearing themselves apart. No excuses, no hiding, no protecting themselves. Only truth. Selena lowered her head further. Her wet eyelashes trembled slightly. I know, she said quietly. Her voice had become softer now. I know every one of you will probably still love me. I know many of you will still try to understand me after hearing all of this. Small painful smiles appeared on some faces below. Because she was right. Even after hearing everything, many of them still could not bring themselves to hate her. Not immediately, not when she stood there crying before them, not when she looked so broken. But Selena slowly shook her head. But what I did to him, her voice trembled, was wrong. She slowly closed her eyes. Completely wrong. No matter how young I was, no matter how naive I was, no matter how foolish I was. Her shoulders shook slightly. It was wrong. It was all my fault. It was all wrong. Tears slowly rolled down her cheeks. So wrong. She pressed trembling fingers against her own chest. I am not a good person, I am a sinner. I am not all light and kindness, not pure. The words seemed painful for her to say. Because for years she had heard people call her holy, call her perfect, call her a blessing. Yet now she stood there destroying that image with her own hands. If, she whispered weakly, if it had only been a mistake, then maybe things would be different. She slowly raised her wet eyes. Because after I said those words, after the consequences came, I didn't come forward. Her voice cracked. I didn't clear his name. The crowd stiffened. Selena continued. I let the lie become truth. I let everyone believe it. Her breathing had become uneven now, even when his image was ruined, even when everyone started looking at him like a monster. People slowly lowered their eyes, because many of them remembered hearing his name spoken with disgust, remembered joining those conversations, remembered throwing insults, remembered judging someone they had never truly known. Selena's tears continued falling, even when people called him disgusting, even when the whole empire hated him, even when he was punished. Her fingers slowly tightened. He had lashes struck across his body, painful wounds, scars. Scars he didn't deserve. Some people unconsciously looked away, others stared at the ground. He was rejected by people he loved, broken by them, thrown away by his own family, hated by everyone. Her voice nearly disappeared at the end. And all of that was my fault. Absolute silence. And I hid this truth for 5 years. Selena lowered her head completely now. Her tears dropped onto the stone platform beneath her feet. If I was really pure, if I was really good, I would have spoken back then. I was scared, I had reasons, but none of them should have mattered. She shook her head weakly. It is still my fault. I hurt the person I loved, the person who never deserved any of this. Her shoulders trembled. Then finally, he was innocent. The words echoed softly. He always was. Another tear fell, then another. Selena slowly lifted her face toward the countless people staring at her, and with trembling lips, she finally said, "He is not a disgusting rapist." Her voice shook. "He is not disgusting," Selena said softly, her trembling voice spreading through the grand plaza. Tears still rolled quietly down her cheeks, but she no longer tried wiping them away. "He is a pure, lovely, and a beautiful person." Her words came slowly, not because she was searching for something to say, but because every word carried memories. "The gentlest person I have ever known," she whispered. "The person I myself wanted to become more gentle and more kind because of." Her fingers slowly tightened over her chest. "The person I love the most." Silence. Nilla, standing behind her, stared at Selena's back with widened eyes. "My Grace," she whispered unconsciously. For years she had stayed beside Selena. She had attended her daily life, watched her smile at people, watched her spend sleepless nights working for others, watched her quietly for a very long time. But never had she known that Selena had been carrying all of this alone. And hearing those words about Razeal, hearing Selena describe him herself, Nilla became quiet. She ignored the confession for a moment, ignored innocence and guilt, ignored everything else. Because something else had caught her thoughts. Gentle, pure, beautiful. Those words had come from Selena, from the Saintess herself. Nilla had never met Razeal personally, only heard rumors, disgusted whispers from people, stories of a weak, shameful man. Stories that painted him as ugly inside and out. Yet Selena was speaking of someone completely different. Someone warm, someone kind, someone worth loving. For the first time in her life, Nilla quietly wondered, what kind of person was Razeal really, for him to be described by such words by the Saintess herself? Then Selena suddenly turned back toward the crowd. Her wet eyes looked over the countless people standing beneath the platform. Thousands of faces, thousands of eyes looking back at her. "And I," Selena started, her voice shaking slightly, "I am not standing here today just to tell everyone this because I wanted to remove the guilt from my own heart." She slowly shook her head. "No, I did not gather everyone here for myself." Her eyes lowered briefly before lifting again. "I told all of you this because I wanted all of you to understand him." Her tears fell again. "So you all can stop hating him, please." The word came out weakly, almost breaking. "He doesn't deserve any of it. He isn't who I made him look like. He isn't who all of you think he is." Selena pressed trembling fingers against her chest. "Please, I beg all of you, just look at him for who he truly is. Don't judge him through my lies. Don't judge him because of what I said." Her voice finally cracked. "He deserves love too, please." And then she cried quietly, like someone who had finally reached the point where holding everything inside had become impossible. Below the platform, the crowd remained silent, but their faces had begun changing. Some were in complete denial, some simply shook their heads slowly. No, something is wrong. They rejected everything entirely, because love sometimes refused truth. Sometimes people held on to what they wanted to believe even when reality stood directly before them. Others looked betrayed, not because they hated Selena, but because something inside them had broken. A middle-aged man looked down at his hands. "You were the one person I thought was pure," he whispered quietly. To be continued. Hope you liked today's video. Join the community by subscribing and dropping a like. I'll be back with another update as soon as possible. See you then.